That's how you're supposed to be living. We all have the ability to do that. You've just got this trauma running that is interfering with that. So let's get you reset.
How would you like to reset your brain? To end the looping, to fix the glitch that is keeping you stuck? Basically, how would you like to find solutions to healing the trauma, rather than just waiting and wondering for the next upset to occur? Discover ways to heal your chronic illness. And instead of being looked at as a diagnosis, have tools to reboot your internal operating system, your memory, your life. Now, you hear me talk a lot about ways to be kind to your mind and trauma and neuroscience, especially when it comes to using Havening techniques, which is the modality that I use often in my practice. But there's more than one method to handle dysregulation. And there should be. And that's why I'm always aligning with like minds to share different approaches. After all, the more brain candy in your candy jar, the better. That way you can make a choice to find what resonates with you and use it when you need it. Dr. Don Wood is one of my favorite people when it comes to nerding out on neuroscience. And from his own personal experience of facing secondary trauma from the poor emotional and physical health that his wife and daughter faced, he took a deep dive into finding ways to help them heal. And from that, he shares more about his own patented approach that has served thousands of people at his institute to help his clients find the healing they need and so desperately seek. Plus, Dr. Don takes it to the next level with his own technique that he developed that stops panic attacks before they stop you. This conversation is a must to add to your playlist, so take a listen. Dr. Don, I am so excited to have you on the Holistically Speaking podcast space. What an honor. I just had the opportunity to be on your podcast recently, and being able to collaborate with like minds, people I truly respect and align with, is what it's all about. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to share more about you and what you do and let the podcast community know who you are. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, Hilary. I enjoyed that podcast that we did. We could have done 5 hours and we still wouldn't have been finished. Right? We just got on a roll, right? And it just kept going, which was amazing.
I love that. I love having good conversations. And you're right. Sometimes I have to put a limit on this. And before we started recording, I said to you, and I say this to my guests all the time, what's your heart out? How much time you have? Because it is about respecting other people's time. But I got to tell you, I put an hour aside for these podcasts, but sometimes I feel like I don't need to press stop on these record buttons because there's just such good content and such good communication and conversation that happens here. And when we're talking about trauma, we can never share enough. And that's why you're here.
We have so much great information to share to help people, right? We're both passionate about helping people. So the more people that hear about what you do and what I do, I think the better.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. You are the founder and CEO of the Inspire Performance Institute, and you have so much to offer at the Institute. Frankly, I cannot wait to come down to Florida to get a taste of it all and to really be a part of the whole process itself. But from what you share there and the fact that you really hold space for learning more about trauma, neuroscience, the developments, really digging into the root of the issues with folks. First, I want to start out with how you came about diving into this work. Like, it's a falling into, really, but what was it for you?
It really came down to issues that happened between my wife and my daughter that I had no trauma. When I say no trauma, I really mean a pretty idyllic childhood. My parents never argued, never fought, never yelled at us. So my nervous system stayed regulated, which I think is a big factor in, even to today, I've been very healthy all my life. And so I can get bumped here and there, a teacher, a coach, a friend. But my nervous system stayed pretty regulated because of the home I grew up in. And so when I met my wife, I realized very quickly that she was not living in that world. She had a lot of trauma from a very dysfunctional father that just ran her house with terror. And so even though I thought, well, once she got married to me, we got married really young at 19. So when she was living with me, then she wouldn't have any of that fear anymore. That should all go away. And it didn't go away. So she was always living in fear. And no matter how carefully I spoke, how much effort I tried to put into not making her cry, I could make her cry with just a word. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't stop that, because I wasn't raising my voice. I was very much like my father, yet she would still get activated with just a word, a sound, even just a message that she would interpret through an action I would take, and she would feel unsafe. And then when my daughter turned 14, she's diagnosed with Crohn's, and we don't know that she's had trauma that when she was 6. So then she had Crohn's, and then she also developed another autoimmune lung disorder called idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis, which is basically where the immune system releases the iron in the blood. And so her lungs would start filling up with blood. So that was sort of the final straw that made me say, if I don't figure something out, we're going to lose our daughter. So then I started to do the research and made the connection between trauma and autoimmune disorders.
It's so interesting when we are supporting others that we're so close to, you and I being in this field of mental health and supporting people that come in to hire us to help them is one thing. But when it comes back to your own family, it is such a different ball game, really, because there's a personal connection there. And obviously with what we do, we already are empaths in a way because we are already servicing others in the most intimate space, which is the mental side of things, the emotional side. But how was that for you, being able to understand it and be able to separate yourself, but also be able to be the supportive husband, the supportive father, and still not let it embody you while you're holding space for someone else?
Well, what made it difficult is the Crohn's was obviously a problem. She ended up having 4 operations. They took out 24 inches of her intestines. So she was sick a lot. And just watching your child suffer like that puts a whole new set of pressure in terms of time to find an answer. And then when she got the hemosiderosis diagnosis, that was basically a death sentence. Because if you can't solve that problem, only 1 in 1.2 million people get it. So there's no research dollars into it. They told us there's no cure for it. We don't know what even caused it. That put even more pressure on. So now she's got both things going on for her. And so that made it very, very difficult and put that extra pressure to find it quickly. But I think that was probably a benefit for me. So it sped up the process, right? It was like nonstop research, constantly working on it, and eventually came up with the answer, which then developed the program. If it's being caused by trauma, how are we fixing trauma? And as you know, most of the trauma work is all about managing, coping, and living with it. And I was saying, well, why aren't we fixing it? So why is it not being fixed? And so that's how I developed the whole TIPP program, was to come up with a solution.
You have to be your own healthcare advocate first. So being able to understand it is and embrace it instead of first of all, not ignoring it's never a good thing. But understanding it instead of being afraid of it is much more empowering than just putting everything in the hands of somebody else.
Right. And so basically what I discovered is that it's coming from a memory glitch. It's looping and continues to loop. So what I've done is develop the program that basically resets that memory. So it stops activating the nervous system. You don't forget about the trauma. So we're not eliminating the memory. We're just eliminating the response to the memory that the mind was constantly doing. So that's what was creating. As we know, our fight or flight system is a perfectly designed system for threats, right? It's supposed to turn on when there's a threat and shut off when the threat's extinguished or gone. However, memory keeps it running. So your fight or flight response is supposed to be an emergency management system. But for so many people, it becomes an operating system. So it's operating on all the time. So it's like getting into your car and you're going to drive 30 miles an hour, but you step on the gas all the way down to the floor, but you use the brakes to keep you going 30. So you're going to burn out the system, right? The transmission, the engine, the brakes, everything's going to eventually wear out because it's not supposed to do that, right? You use the brakes when it's necessary, use the gas when it's necessary. The gears shift automatically. If it's operating under ideal conditions, a car should last a long time. It won't last very long under those kinds of conditions.
That's a great way of putting it. I love car analogies. I find that I use them a lot. So because we all, most, if not all, many of us have cars. Many of us know how we need to take care of the vehicle, which tends to be ourselves, right? So the car analogy, I think, always resonates with people because it really allows you to think about it in a different way by pulling yourself out of the narrative. But what you share right there is so valuable because something that you and I also align with is one of many things, Dr. Don, is that the stories happen to you. The stories have happened, but you have the responsibility to yourself to change the narrative. So yes, those pages are there in the book of your life. And it's not so much that you try to just close the page, forget about the page. What can you do to empower yourself to write the new chapter and the new narrative going forward? And your brain looping and the looping and just everything you're doing with the TIPP method really embraces that. And it resonates with me because it aligns it's so similar to the work that I do with Havening and my Hug It Out program, that it's really about giving people the tools so that they can empower themselves. And you and I are just those guides by the side. Let me share with you how this works. So can you run down the TIPP method?
Yeah, basically, but just what you said was really powerful too, because that's the first thing I say to people. So I work with also, as you can hear from the name of our program, it's about performance. So I say, what's interfering with your ability to perform at your highest level? And it's trauma, because trauma is pulling energy from the system. So if you're running a program, the trauma program, and you got multiple trauma programs running, just like your phone, right? You can wake up in the morning with 100% power and then 5 programs open up and start running. You're going to drain the system faster. And so what I always say when I work with, especially the athletes, I say, I'm not making you a faster runner. You were always that fast. I just guided your system to release more power that it no longer needs for running the trauma programs. And so they always had that ability. They just couldn't access it. So I love what you just said, is that we're just guides. We're not doing anything that they're not capable of doing on their own. They just didn't know how to do it. So we walk them through it. And it's like I had a lady come in, and for the first 15 minutes, she's sitting there telling me about all the things that happened in her life, all the traumas. And when she finished, I said, is there anything else? And she looked at me and she was like, well, that was a lot, don't you think? and I said, oh, no, it was absolutely a lot. However, for the last 15 minutes, I've learned a lot about what's happened to you, but I haven't learned anything about you. So let's start talking about you now, because that's not who you are. That's just what happened to you. And so the first thing I say to everybody when they come in is that there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your mind. So they say, well, I have really bad anxiety. And I'll say, well, anxiety is a symptom. It's not what you have. Your mind is using anxiety for a reason. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to alert you to something. What is it that your mind is trying to get done? Let's get to the root of it so that we can resolve it. And so that's what we do in the program. So I do a 4-hour session. The first 2 hours is just doing exactly what we were just doing here. I educate you on how your brain's been working, why your mind is doing what it's doing. And I say, how could it have done it any differently based on the way your mind has experienced life? It's responding to your experiences and creating responses to them. The problem is the responses are not possible now because they were really good when they were happening, but the memory keeps them going. But there's nothing you can do about it, but your mind doesn't know that. So let's reset and update, reboot, refresh, and adjust your mind. Once we get that done, then your mind operates clear and calm and at peace with understanding. And then thoughts become beneficial, appealing, and possible. And then I'll say, how would you like to have your mind operating like that? And everybody goes, well, that would be amazing. And I said, that's how you're supposed to be living. We all have the ability to do that. Mm-hmm. You've just got this trauma running that is interfering with that. So let's get you reset. And so the first couple of hours is all about education and science about what I learned from trying to find a solution for my daughter in particular, and my wife, but more my daughter. And
I love that you bring that up. So you do integrate your own personal experiences into your session and your work. I mean, if you think about it, just going back 20, 30 years, the Freudian days, the days of the old psychiatrists and psychologists, it was never about sharing your own stuff, right? And I think what's so beautiful about how we're seeing mindfulness, mental health, emotional well-being in this day and age with those of us like you and I that support those on their journey is that people need to know you're real and you've been through stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you're not just letting it all out, sharing it all, but to give them a sense of like, listen, I have my own stuff. And listen, I've been through this and I can understand you. And I imagine with you, I think I get this a lot, Dr. Don, is that a lot of times the clients that align with me, I wind up seeing are so similar or have a similar story to my own to where you can really align with them. And isn't that just the energy of the universe, like working so beautifully?
Oh, that's a perfect way to explain it, Hilary, because it's the same thing when I go on, like, I'll get calls from this podcast, other podcasts you do as well. And what'll happen is when people hear the story about my daughter or my wife, right, or even stories I tell about different people who've gone through the programs, they'll go, you were describing me, or you were describing my wife or my daughter or whatever. They relate to those stories and they're real. And what people are looking for is hope. Yeah. Right? I just want to know. I had one lady who was referred to me to talk to me who had schizophrenia. And she was pretty high functioning, but she had dropped out of college. And so I was just on a phone call. I was with her and I said, let me tell you what I know about schizophrenia and how I think schizophrenia, right, is coming. It's a very extreme form of a response to trauma. The brain becomes very disorganized, right? It can't handle it. So what is coming from trauma. And I start going through and I'm explaining, and then I can hear her starting to cry. And I said, I can hear, are you crying right now? Can you tell me what you're experiencing? And she says, for the first time in my life, you've given me hope. And that's what she wanted. She wanted to know that there's some way to address this. She's not permanently stuck in this situation. And that's all people are looking for, is when you can say, there is a way, and that's why I share so many stories of people like my daughter whose Crohn's is gone. Her lung disorder is gone. They would tell you that's impossible, right? The medical community will tell you that's impossible because that's how they've been trained. Not because they don't care, not because they're not smart. They're super smart, probably a lot smarter than I am. But at the same time, they never studied it this way. Right. And so if nobody's ever shown you the evidence that, you know, because most doctors are scientists, right? So they want evidence. Well, they've never seen that happen. So when I say my daughter's Crohn's was just really inflammation caused by trauma, and when we resolved the trauma, the inflammation went down. Well, they've never studied that. Nobody's ever given them that evidence. And I'm telling them just this way, and they're like, no, that's impossible. You can't do that. The same way when I say I can eliminate post-traumatic stress and panic attacks in 4 hours, it's a glitch. It's an error message. We can eliminate it, right? We don't need to live with it. So if you've never heard it before, never seen it before, and have evidence before, you can see why the people who have trained one way can't see that solution.
Yeah. And it's really about working together. Yeah. The one reason why I love working with doctors who are continuous in their education, and maybe they're getting involved with integrative health or integrative medicine or functional medicine, they're starting to work more with the mind. And while they get some of those courses in college, the same thing I say when I work with people in integrative nutrition, because that's another part of my background, is that they don't get nutrition classes in medical school. They know how to give you the pill. They know how to say, this is your problem, but they don't support you on the journey. It's no fault to them. It's just how the system is set up. It's really up to each doctor to make a decision. I want to learn more about this. I'll take some extra classes, But that's why we're here, so that we can support them on that. And I want to go back to what you were just saying about panic attacks and PTSD. What is anxiety and a panic attack? Because a lot of people that I've worked with, and I'm sure you have too, assume that something's a panic attack or assume that something's anxiety. And having the distinction and knowing the difference is very important, because you can allow your brain to think something and it's not, and then you roll more down that rabbit hole,
Well, yeah, a lot of times people will confuse those two, but it also at the same time, they don't understand why they're having it. And I say, why would your mind be anxious, right? It doesn't just naturally become anxious for no reason. There's something happening. So let's get to the root and figure out why it's happening. Because when we get to the solution or get to the core issue, then we can address it. But if we just treat the symptom of anxiety by giving you anxiety medication, we're not fixing the problem. So it's like coming into the ER with a broken leg and they shoot you up with morphine. Well, you're going to feel fine when you go home, right? But you didn't solve the problem. You're going to be back when the morphine wears off. So I say panic attacks are a combination of physical and emotional. So the mind is feeling uneasy, but it's below your conscious awareness. So you and I could be sitting here having a normal conversation. I'm not aware that my system is starting to think something's wrong. And it could have been from a word you said or something, or maybe it had nothing to do with you. I could have heard a car or something outside or whatever happened. So my mind is starting to search for this lion that it thinks may be hanging around right where I'm at.
Yeah.
But it can't find the lion. So on a very low level, it starts to actually make physical changes to the body. So we need a little more oxygen. So now what happens is we start to then speed up the heart to start getting more oxygen, which then starts to change the oxygen CO2 levels. Now, as we know, the body communicates constantly with the brain. So it sends a message saying, hey, we need more oxygen. You better speed up the lungs. Now, the brain that was looking for the lion and can't find the lion just got a notice that the danger looks a lot worse because now we're running out of oxygen. And then it gets a message that the pH of the blood has changed, another warning message. So the brain, the mind can't find the danger. You're not even aware of it, but it keeps getting messages from the body that something's wrong. So what does it do? Panics and goes instantly into a response that you weren't even aware of was coming because you had no advance warning. And so what we're doing now is I mentioned to you, we got a patent on this. So we can actually detect what I said in the patent when I wrote the patent is that a panic attack is happening well in advance of the attack, but people are unaware of it. So if we can detect some of the signs, one of them being oxygen, heart rate. So we're have a product now that you're going to be able to wear that will detect that the oxygen is starting to change. And you can set whatever parameters you want on it. It will alert you that something's happening. And then the program that we taught you, right, comes onto your phone to tell you, to remind you what to do, to shut it down. You don't even experience the panic attack.
So it's almost like having that guy by your side digitally.
Yep. Warning
I love
you
that.
Hey, something's happening. Follow the process that we taught you to shut it down if it happens. But you could shut it down in advance of it happening. So even though we're able to eliminate panic attacks without the device, the only way I got the patent was to add in technology. So the technology is actually good because what it does is it gives you the peace of mind that I can go out to that meeting, I can go and travel, I can do those things. I don't have to worry that I'm going to have one without me knowing about it. And so one of the things that it will do is on your cell phone, for example, it will then alert you and give you a phone call, even though it's not a real phone call, right? But it's a pretense phone call that you could, if you're in a meeting and you know that this is starting to happen, you can step out and say, I have a call I have to take, right? But you haven't experienced a panic attack. That's the biggest fear people have, is that they're going to have that.
It's the fear of the panic attack before the panic attack hit. That's brilliant. I love that idea. I mean, we're wearing these smart devices all the time that are testing the closing the ring, circles this many miles, this many steps, where our heart rate is. This is a level up, because being able to have something that is attached to our brain and our mindfulness and letting us know, it also is making you more alert and aware. And I think the first step to any change is awareness, right? So if you become more aware of your own personal road journey when you're feeling something come on that doesn't feel right. I mean, your body is going to tell you. Your body keeps the score, as we know, as we've heard before with Bessel. But being able to be mindful and aware of that certainly is going to have some kind of empowerment that it is going to put in a person when they realize, I got to stop and step back for a second. Let me just step out of the room, take that call, which is more of a mental call, really, to say, all right, I'm okay. I know that this is coming, and I know that this is present. And for those who are listening, just to be aware of this, for something to be a trauma and for trauma encoding to happen, there really has to be 4 things available. It has to have that feeling of inescapability. There has to be like a message or something that we're giving to it, a meaning. There has to be an event that potentially took place. And also there has to be that landscape, because the brain doesn't know if the saber-toothed tiger's there yesterday or today. We can psych the brain out. If you're in a car accident and you go by an exit and you're in that same exit time and time again, the brain doesn't know if it happened then or yesterday. So this is bringing an awareness to you.
We're really excited about it because, like I said, so many people who experience panic attacks, even though we can help them, shut them down anyway without the device is that peace of mind. I know I can go out now and I don't have to worry. I'll get an advance warning that they never got before. And then they go through the tools. So all their tools show up instantly on their phone, reminding them, here's the steps you do to shut it down. You haven't had it yet, but now we know it's coming, so you can just do this and shut it down. You'll never experience it.
That is brilliant.
It'll also give you an excuse if you want to step out of the room, right? Because, I have to take this call, right? And it'll also send an emergency message to a spouse or somebody that can also then double check in on you and say, everything good? Do you need any help? Right?
And nothing like this exists. This is the first, I've never heard anything like this. This is brilliant. This should have been around years ago. But I love that this is yours. I can't wait to see it. I'm very curious about this, because this is something that could be so fine-tuned to, it's all bio-individuality, right? We all are different in our own ways. So one person's call could be different from another's, and maybe even integrating other methodologies and other methods and modalities in with that whatever, because in the moment you might need a deep breathing technique. You might need the TIPP method. You might need havening techniques. You might just need a walk in the park or just affirmations. Whatever it is, whatever works for you, if this aligns with that can be so powerful.
When I wrote the patent, I said, I know that this is what's happening. And so after I wrote the patent, we were waiting for it goes through the typical process. I found a study out of SMU.
Oh, that's where I went.
Yep, they had 2,000 hours. Is that where you went?
That's my alma mater.
No way.
Yes, I'm a SMU grad.
Study.
I would love to see that.
Perfect. Yep. So they had 2,000 hours of data on panic attacks. And of the 2,000 hours, they had 13 people experience a panic attack during the study. and they had them all monitored. So they had them hooked up for heart rate, oxygen levels, all that kind of stuff. All 13 people said the panic attack came on instantly, but the data was showing it wasn't. So that it validated my patent, which is what I was saying. If we detect it in advance, we can shut it down. You don't have to experience the panic. The problem is that once the panic attack comes, right, you're so dysregulated, you can't shut it down. It's very hard.
Yeah, you're spiraling.
Right?
It's very hard to pull yourself back out. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this way now you can say, oh, the symptoms of what I would have experienced are showing up, but it's very light. You're not even aware of it. You could do your havening technique, or you could do what we teach and shut it off.
It's brilliant. And because even there's times that I have to say, even as a coach and a practitioner and being trauma informed, there are moments where I go down the rabbit hole. I mean, we're human. That's where the brain goes. So the more in alignment we are with it, the more we are in tune with it, the shorter the amount of time we're in the rabbit hole. But it doesn't mean that we don't go there. I mean, we're human. We go through these emotions and feelings as well. But being aware and being able to understand your own makeup and what works for you is really, really amazing. I'm curious about the SMU study. What school was that out of at SMU? Who did that? Remember?
Gosh, what's that?
I'm curious which department, which school was that in the?
I'm trying to remember now. I'll send you the study. I have the study.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. I love that the my alma mater is working on something that's so closely associated with what I do in my life. So that's great to hear that. Because I don't know if I was really focusing on that when I was in school.
Right. But what was good about it is it basically backed up what I was saying.
Yeah.
Right? With some evidence. Yeah. And so now you say, okay, well, if we know that that's happening, right? So what we'll do is on this device that we're going to use, you'll get used to it, but you'll say, I want this set for 95% oxygen saturation to alert me. And if you find that that's happening maybe more often, right? Maybe you set it at 94, you learn what parameters you're wanting to have. Yeah. Right. And so you'll just educate yourself, and it'll set off and give you all the signals. So when the patent late last year, they at first came back and they declined all our, claims, right? Saying, well, you're just monitoring vitals. And then our patent attorney said, no, we're not. The vitals are just alerting us to have them then do what we've taught them how to do. Once they understood that, then they gave us the patent for panic attacks, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. So we got it for all three.
And that's really where people are going the most. Yeah. I mean, that is what we hear the most in the work we do is the stress, anxiety, PTS. I mean, it's all there. So that's so fabulous that you're working on that. And, since we're talking about college and school, and I'm a college professor, I've been a college professor for over 10 years at St. John's University in New York. And, that is one group of people, those students that deal with such anxiety and stress and the feelings associated with. And I've noticed that age group is so much more in touch with their mental health than I ever was when I was in school. So that's great to know that. But in that, moving into an area that I want to talk about, you do so much with performance with athletes. I'm curious, can someone, working with high level athletes, can they break a world record just simply by changing a mindset?
They can. And we've got demonstrations of it. So I worked with a gentleman, Marco Cicchetto. Mm-hmm. Marco is a marathon runner from Kenya. He got recruited, him and his cousin, by the University of Alaska for scholarship. Mm-hmm. His cousin didn't acclimate very well, committed suicide. And Marco was so distraught that he ended up trying to take his own life. And his whole story's out there, so I'm not telling anything confidential. So he went out, took a bunch of pills, took some alcohol, went out for a run, passed out in the snow for 2 days. He lost both his legs below the knees from frostbite. So he had to learn how to walk again on prosthetics. But then they built him blades so that he could start running marathons. And so he was training, and then they called me and said, we think he's got great potential, but he's sort of plateaued. He's not improving any faster with his training. It seems to have, he's hit a peak. We think it's in his mind now. It's not physical. Can you take him through the program? So I took Marco through the program. This is in February of 2019. 9 days later, he runs in a marathon and takes 15 seconds per mile off his time.
Oh my gosh, that is insane.
And so what I said to Marco is, I said, Marco, I didn't make you a faster runner. You were always that fast, but the ATP, the mitochondria in the cell, as using that energy for something else, we release that energy. So a few weeks later, he runs in the Boston Marathon in 2019 and breaks the world record. He becomes a world record holder for marathons for amputees. A couple months later, runs in the Chicago Marathon, breaks his own world record by another 5 minutes, and gets signed by Nike.
Oh my goodness.
So we've got lots of examples of that. When we have this unresolved trauma, it's affecting our performance physically as well. And so when you release that energy, right, you can perform better.
Yeah. Yeah, I say that a lot to my students, because a lot of times I work with performing artists. That's my background before I was, being a television news anchor for years and working on stage. That it's when we are nervous, when we have stage fright, it's not a fear. It really is just energy. And if you look at it that way and change the mindset, that don't be scared walking on stage, be energetic and use that energy in a different place. And I noticed when I started doing that with either my students or, the Metropolitan Opera singers that I work with or Broadway actors, that it changes things, because now they're seeing things more as energy rather than I'm scared of the audience. No, you're not. You're excited about the audience. You're excited about running and taking 15 seconds off your time. You just need to get out of the blocks. The blocks are what do it. Before we go any further, I just want to mention to those listening or watching on YouTube that we're talking with Dr. Don Wood from the Performance Institute, the Inspired Performance Institute. This is such an amazing conversation, talking about the TIPP method, talking about how you can get through and over these blocks that you might have in your mind. And it's so in the power in your own hands. And obviously with the guides by your side, like Dr. Wood or myself, can really help you get there. So if you are touched, moved, and inspired by this conversation, please pass it along, share it, leave a comment or a review wherever you are listening or watching, and just let people know that this is out there, because there are so many ways that you can take your power back mindfully and do it with programs like the TIPP method, for an example. So we're going to give you all that information in the podcast notes as well, how to get in touch with Dr. Don and find out more about the Inspired Performance Institute and your books, Emotional Concussions and You Must Be Out of Your Mind, which is also the name of your podcast, which I love that. Can you talk to me about the atmospheric conditions and emotional concussions? What is that?
So the reason I used emotional concussions was because so many people would say, oh, I saw your testimonials from the people who at the Boston Marathon or the Vegas shooting, and I don't have anything like that. So how is this going to help me? And I'll say, well, if you had, people call them small T traumas, I refer to them as emotional concussions. That's the teacher that told you you're stupid, right? Or the parent who criticized you. So they're not like a big T kind of trauma, but as you know, right, we know that they show up later on because a child doesn't have enough life experience to understand what they just heard. So they're going to build a meaning to that. What does it mean that they told me I'm not smart enough, I'm not this, I'm not that? And then that meaning gets stuck, and then it creates behaviors and habits. And so if those don't get released, you're going to find, why do I always avoid these kinds of situations? Or, and again, it can come sometimes with the best of intentions. So my wife told me a story. She was like, older too. So she told me a story when she was 6 years of age, and she had all this trauma going on anyway. So it's not like she hasn't had enough, but now she goes to a tea party that some of the mothers in the neighborhood put on. And so her grandmother dressed her all up in a pretty dress and did her hair, and she's feeling really good. She's all excited. She goes, and the mothers are sitting there greeting all the little girls. And one of the mothers says, oh, would you look at this one? She is going to be a real heartbreaker when she grows up. And all the other mothers are going, oh, yeah, that's a real heartbreaker there. She said, I got sick and I wanted to go home. She was crying as she told me that story. She says, I thought they saw something in me that I was bad. I was going to hurt people. That's how a 6-year-old heard that message. Now, was that what they were trying to do? No. Right? But that still, as an adult, she would cry if she told you that story. So those are emotional concussions.
Yeah, that reminds me, you're saying that, and it just reminds me so much of why words are so important, and the words we use and choose are so important, depending on who we're talking to. I mean, that reminds me of a story. When I was a kid, I remember seeing on my report card, she marches to the beat of a different drummer. Now, no kid wants to beat to any other drummer, but be a part of the crew. So while that might have been, I want to fit in. I don't want to march to my own drummer. So to me, that might have been a little T, because all of a sudden I feel like I'm not like everybody else. I'm not going to sit at the cool lunch table. I'm special. I have, like you said about the young lady that you're talking about, you just feel alienated, and it's not intentional. So what would your words be to adults out there that be mindful of the words you use and choose with both children and adults?
Especially now, knowing what I know, right? After studying all this, I would have done it differently even with my children. Just some of the words I would have chosen. Right? And the way you say it, you have to be very intentional, right? And understand that sometimes even with good intentions, right, you can have that kind of an effect on your child, and we don't want to do that. So really think about, don't just use those flippant sayings that we grew up with, because you think you understand it, but the child doesn't have, like, as a really, really silly kind of an example. And I never understood when I was a kid what my mom meant. She used to always say, oh, it's difficult to make ends meet. That's a saying people use. It's difficult to make ends meet. I thought she was talking about beef. Meat, right?
Meat, like, M-E-A-T, not M-E-E-T.
Why
right?
are we trying to make meat, like, connect? Like, I thought she was talking about making pieces of meat connect. I mean, that sounds so silly, but as a child, don't know what she's meaning by make ends meet.
Very literal.
Yeah, very literal. And so,
I'm still very literal.
Yeah. So that wasn't traumatic, right? So it wasn't like it affected me, but I remember
but you're like,
that was a confusing statement to a child.
Right.
And so that's why I'm saying you have to be very intentional on the way you say things, or make sure that your child understands what you mean. So that you don't. And that's what I talk about with the atmospheric conditions, because you asked me about that.
Correct. Yes.
What I talk about is, like, my wife grew up in very dark, stormy atmospheric conditions. She had a lot of trauma. So she now filters through those atmospheric conditions to respond to her current environment. So she's living with me in very sunny, bright atmospheric conditions the way I grew up. And I can't understand why she's not seeing the sunshine and the light, because she's filtering through her own atmospheric conditions. How could she not have done that? So if I would say, oh, we've got this great opportunity to do this and make this money, she would go, yeah, but what if this happens? And then what happens if we lose that money? And then what's going to happen if then we lose our house? She would, like, go down all the rabbit holes we were just talking about. She would go down a dozen rabbit holes. And I'm like, how do you think like that? I couldn't understand how she thought like that. Now it makes perfect sense to me. Her atmospheric conditions saw things differently. She was protecting herself.
And it's so, so important to meet people where they're at. Our own expectations and experiences are going to be so different from somebody else's. Even if you grew up in the same town, on the same street, it really is the environment of what happens within those walls a lot of times, those first walls that are so formidable in your years, So it's really being more mindful, even if you had a wonderful childhood and were protected and felt all the safety and security and love that you could possibly feel, being open that, like the saying, someone is always fighting a battle you know nothing about, right? And
Yep.
it really likes you, you know, hopefully it'll help people take a step back too. And when someone's having a bad day, like I witness this a lot. And I think in my own growth and experience and shifts, I'm more conscious of even when I'm on like a train or a subway or in public spaces, if someone's a little nasty or has an attitude, my first thought, I don't want to react. I want to respond differently, right? And being mindful of like, you know what? I don't know what is going on if this person is not standing in this checkout line, or I don't know if maybe they just had it really bad earlier. They're stressed out about money or whatever it is. Sometimes kindness could go a long way. And I'm sure you have witnessed that. I certainly have, whether it's people we don't know and we just pass them in life for a few seconds, to those that we, you know, wake up every morning with and go to sleep with at night. It's really being mindful of that person and meeting them where they're at, you know?
Yeah, because everybody wants to feel safe. Just like you talked about when they said marches to a beat of a different drummer. 1,000 years ago, that would have killed you. Right? Because the tribe would have said, that girl's a little strange. We don't need to have her around.
Right.
Right. And so, but that's how our brains still think. Right.
I would be voted off the island of Survivor.
Right.
That's so true. You're right.
That's how our mind sees. That's how you saw it as a little girl. That's not a good thing. Right. That's not safe. I want to fit in. Right. And if I don't fit in, I'm not safe.
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of messages that we have to make sure that we're communicating with our children and how we speak. Right. And again, was the teacher trying to say anything mean or trying to hurt you? No. And so
probably thought they were doing me a favor and lifting me up, but it's like that could have been said differently. Like, you are excelling. There's different ways to say things that can make a child feel like, oh, I'm still part of something, but wow, look at me. I'm doing something that's amazing, but I still have my cool friends that I get to hang out with, you know? Never separate
or I
them.
see leadership qualities.
Yes. Right. You can be a leader among all your friends and they'll totally listen to you. And then you're like, what? And it completely changes the trajectory of everything. So I love that you touch on that. We have a couple minutes left, so I would love to do.
You're so fast.
I know. So, like we said, we can talk for hours, right? We will. Yep. We'll have more time. I mean, I'm all about coming down and visiting in Florida, so we'll be doing that.
We should be doing retreats together.
We will. We're putting it out there into the universe, folks. That's who are listening. You're getting the first taste of this, and you'll be the first to know too. So, before we close things out, I love to play a little game with my guests. It's a rapid fire word association kind of game. And what I do is I write words down while we're chit-chatting. That's why I'm constantly looking down. Words that you've used, words that you've said, because words matter. And I want you to just come back with the first word that comes to mind, like rapid. Right? Okay. I'm going to get the brain moving on a Tuesday morning. Okay? Here we go.
I didn't know it was going to be tested.
Oh, yes. There'll be a test later. That's the professor in me.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Ready?
Yep.
Hope.
Gratitude.
Good word. Brain.
Brilliant.
Trauma.
Resolve.
Looping. Performance.
Peak.
Panic.
Response.
Anxiety.
Symptom.
Root.
Base.
And manage.
Cope.
We can all learn to do that, right?
Yep.
Loved it. Thank you so much. And on that note, I'd love to give you a moment to share any words that you would like to with those tuning in.
Well, I love spending this time with you because we have the same mindset. So we're doing the same thing, just different approaches, but they all work the same way, right? Our goal is to try to help people. And as I always say, there's nothing wrong with anybody. If you understood the person's atmospheric conditions, you would understand why they do and why they behave the way they do. And there's nothing wrong with them either. So you just need to have understanding. If you can understand, that they filter through their atmospheric conditions, which creates their response, and you approach it from that understanding, then you'll understand why they do what they do.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And just we're going to put everything in the notes about you so that people can get in touch, learn about the TIPP method, learn about the Inspired Performance Institute, also your podcast, You Must Be Out of Your Mind, which thank you so much for having me as a guest. It was a delight to be on the show. And your book, Emotional Concussions, You Must Be Out of Your Mind. And I am sure people are going to be very eager to hear about this product that's coming out very soon. I know I am. And when we get a chance to work together one-on-one and just do the retreats, that's going to be pretty amazing. So Dr. Don, thank you. You're a delight. And thanks for everything you're doing in service for this world.
Oh, same to you. I appreciate your time, Hilary. I've really enjoyed it.
To find out more about Dr. Don Wood and the Inspired Performance Institute, you can just check out all the links that I shared on the podcast page. Everything is there for you to get in touch with him. And be sure to take a listen to his podcast, You Must Be Out of Your Mind. He actually welcomed me on his show, and I shared a link to that episode as well. Now, if you want to give havening a try, I highly recommend you take advantage of the complimentary session that I'm offering to you. Let's Hug It Out and Heal. You can find that link also in the podcast notes. Thanks so much to my friend Lippo Redding for always sharing the music, and my friends over at 2 Market Media for helping me put this podcast together. And never forget this, my friend, that your trauma is not your fault, but finding the healing, the understanding, and the gratitude to live your best life, that is your responsibility. I love you. I believe in you. And I will see you next week. Be well.